Adolphe Faller, The Human Body, translated by French Oliver, recorded by Power of Voice. Chapter 13, The Central and Peripheral Nervous Systems. Classification of the nervous system. The nervous system connects the organism with its environment and its internal organs. The characteristics of the somatic nerve system are conscious sensation, voluntary movement, and rapid processing of information. The vegetative nervous system, on the other hand, is responsible for maintaining a constant internal milieu and for the autonomous regulation of organ functioning in response to environmental demands. The somatic and the autonomic nervous systems include sensory as well as motor connections. Afferent conduction occurs when impulses are conducted from the periphery to the center. In efferent conduction, impulses are conducted from the center to the periphery. By its spatial distribution, the nervous system is divided into a central nervous system, CNS, and the peripheral nervous system. The CNS includes the brain and spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system includes all somatic and autonomic nerves, including the collections of nerve cells called ganglia. Role of nervous system. The central and peripheral nervous systems coordinate the performance of organ systems directly through nerves or indirectly through endocrine glands. They regulate the activities of the locomotor apparatus, the respiratory, circulatory, digestive, and urogenital systems, and the system of endocrine glands. Integration and evaluation of incoming impulses occur in the central nervous system, while the peripheral nervous system conducts impulses originating in the CNS to the periphery of the body and conducts impulses from the periphery to the CNS. For discussion of the generation, conduction, and the transmission of nerve impulses, see Chapter 3, the nerve impulse, action potential, and Chapter 3, the synapse. Beyond these functions, the so-called higher functions of nervous system, memory, ability to learn and think, judgment, language, are tied to the activity of the central nervous system. Development of the nervous system. The components of the central and peripheral nervous system develop from the outer germ layer, the ectoderm. The first rudiment appears about the 18th day of embryonic development as a plate-like thickening of the ectoderm of the embryonic disc, neural plate. Within the neural plate, between two lateral folds, neural folds, develops a depression, the nerve groove, which subsequently closes to form the neural tube and migrates inward. Parts of the neural folds that do not take part in the formation of the neural tube form the neural crests. The neural tube becomes the central nervous system, brain, and spinal cord, while the neural crest from the peripheral nervous system, peripheral nerves, and ganglia. Central nervous system. The central nervous system is divided into the brain and the spinal cord. Both parts are well protected against external influences by body walls and the cushioning effect of the cerebrospinal fluid, CSF, liquor cerebrospinalis. The brain is developed in a bony capsule, the cranial cavity, while the spinal cord lies in the vertebral canal, surrounded by the bones of vertebral column. Cranial or spinal membranes enclose a space filled with cerebrospinal fluid around the brain and spinal cord, respectively. Development and organization. The division of the brain into cerebrum, midbrain, pons, cerebellum, and medulla oblongata is based on the development from the three embryonic primary brain vesicles, forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain, formed from the anterior end of neural tube. The posterior part of the neural tube becomes the spinal cord. The wall of the neural tube develops into the gray and white matter of brain and spinal cord, while its lumen develops into a system of cavities in the brain, ventricles, and the narrow canal, central canal, and the spinal cord. The derivatives of the primary brain vesicles are as follows. The ventricular system consists of 4 cavities inside the brain, namely the 2 lateral ventricles, the 3rd ventricle of the midbrain, and the 4th ventricles of hindbrain. They are interconnected and are filled with cerebrospinal fluid. The brain. The brain of a newborn weighs about 400 grams and grows in the course of the first 9 months of life to about 800 grams. It reaches close to its final weight, about 1,310 grams, at about 5 to 7 years of age, and is fully formed at 10 years. Data concerning brain weight vary remarkably, 1,100 to 1,600 grams. The brain of a man weighs on average 1,375 grams, that of a woman about 1,245 grams. The lesser weight in the woman is ascribed to the weaker development of her locomotor system and its consequently reduced representation in the CNS. However, when the actual brain weight is compared to body weight, brain over body weight ratio, women show on average 22 grams of brain weight per kilogram of body weight, while in men the figure is 20 grams. The striking example of the blue whale shows that the absolute weight of the brain is no significance. A whale weighing about 74,000 kilograms has a brain weight of 7 kilograms. If now we again compare brain weight to the body weight, 1 kilogram body weight corresponds to 0.1 gram brain weight. If a similar body over brain weight ratio were applied to a human brain, it overweigh on average 7 grams. Cerebrum or forebrain. Cerebral hemispheres. The cerebrum is the highest integration center of the CNS, and for this reason is most markedly differentiated segment of the human brain. Essentially, it is composed of 2 structures, the 2 cerebral hemispheres and several bilateral gray nuclei, basal ganglia. The latter have a partial role in motor activity, especially the initiation and performance of slow movements. They leap deep inside the hemispheres and cannot be seen until the brain is cut. The 2 voluminous cerebral hemispheres are separated by a deep division, the longitudinal fissures, and comprise the major part of the visible substance of the brain. Lobes of the brain. The surface of the brain is formed by convolutions, gyri, separated by fissures, sulci. The 2 lateral sulci and the central sulcus may be considered to divide each hemisphere into 4 lobes: frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, occipital lobe. The frontal lobe lies in front of the central sulcus, the parietal lobe behind it. The temporal lobe lies below the lateral sulcus, and an imaginary line drawn down from the parieto-occipital sulcus separates the parietal lobe from the occipital lobe. Deep inside the lateral sulcus lies the insula island, covered by the frontal, parietal, and temporal lobes. The insula is often regarded as a fifth lobe. It has no known function in the human brain. Each lobe, in turn, has its specific convolutions and fissures. For instance, the frontal lobe comprises the percentral gyrus, which lies immediately in front of the central fissure. It is the motor center that sends impulses to the voluntary muscles. The point situated closest to the forehead, the frontal pole, is the seat of personality. Gray and white matter. In a brain cut in the horizontal coronal plane, the cerebral hemisphere can be seen to consist of an outer gray cortical layer, the cerebral cortex, about 2 to 5 millimeters thick, mainly composed of cell bodies, and an inner white core composed mainly of nerve fibers. The cerebral cortex has a total surface about 2,200 centimeters square, with about 10,000 to 20,000 nerve cells per millimeter cubic. This may be contrasted with the white matter, which houses about 300,000 to 400,000 kilometers of nerve fibers. Medullary tracts and internal capsule. Fibers interconnecting the hemispheres are called commissural fibers. One example is the vast corpus callosum, a fiber system containing about 200 million nerve fibers. Nerve fibers confined to one hemisphere are called association fibers. These run within the same hemisphere from lobe to lobe or fissure to fissure. Finally, there are fibers that run from cerebral cortex to other parts of the CNS called projection fibers. The majority of those from the internal capsule. This structure consists of an anterior limb, a posterior limb, and a segment between them, the genu, knee. Basal ganglia. Several basal ganglia are located next to the genu of the internal capsule, for example, the globus pallidus and the putamen. The globus pallidus and the putamen together are also known as the lentiform nucleus. The anterior limb of the internal capsule is bounded by the caudate nucleus and the lentiform nucleus, which together form the corpus striatum. The posterior limb of the internal capsule is bounded medially by the thalamus. This is an important nuclear area of the encephalon and is not considered part of the basal ganglia. The basal ganglia have an important function in the so-called extrapyramidal motor system. The current view is that their function is to regulate the extent and direction of voluntary movements. The symptoms of lesions of the basal ganglia include disturbance of muscle tone and involuntary movements. Lateral ventricles. The lateral ventricles are situated in the two cerebral hemispheres. They are part of a system of cavities that contain the cerebrospinal fluid, CSF. The CSF is formed by an arterial plexus that extends into both lateral ventricles. The lateral ventricles possesses a frontal horn, a body, an occipital horn, and a temporal horn. Each lateral ventricle is connected with the third ventricles of the diencephalon by an opening, the interventricular foramen. Limbic system. The term limbic system derives from the anatomical relation to the corpus callosum, which it surrounds like a hem, limbus. In the course of evolution, the limbic system was formed from an old part of the cerebrum that consisted mainly of the Palio Cortex and the archicortex. The paleo cortex and the archicortex are often lumped together under the term allocortex, which takes up the major part of the cortex in lower mammals. For example, in humans, these older parts of the brains are overgrown by the newer, strongly developed neocortex. The paleocortex consists essentially of the olfactory brain. The archicortex includes, among other structures, in the amygdala, almonds, the hippocampus, the dentate gyrus, the cingulative gyrus, and the indusium griseum. From the hippocampus, a fiber tract arches to areas of hypothalamus, especially the mammillary bodies. From the mammillary bodies, in turn, pathways run to the reticular formation and the brainstem. The hippocampus and the cingulate gyrus are the central structure of the limbic system. The hippocampus plays an important role in aggression and in behavioral motivation, as well as in learning processes, particularly the formation of explicit memories, that is, those that are accessible to deliberate, conscious recall. Short-term and long-term memory are components of the explicit memory. The limbic system evaluates experience effectively and triggers emotional reactions. Stimulation of these regions triggers rage, for example, but also pleasurable reactions. Thus, it is hardly surprising that many of their pathways end in hypothalamus, which is the major coordinating and reflex center for many sensations such as smell and taste. Since the hypothalamus also regulates the autonomic nervous system, it makes sense that emotional reactions lead to autonomic disturbance, rising blood pressure, blushing, becoming pale, etc., while autonomic disturbances express themselves in emotions and psychosomatic illnesses. Thank you.